I'm not paying you a single dollar." Those were the words the CEO spat at me while standing in front of her employees. I looked down at the invoice in my hand. It wasn't thousands of dollars. It wasn't even hundreds. It was just $199. After spending 6 hours repairing her luxury SUV, after missing my son's school event, after using the last fuel in my truck to reach her office, she refused to pay me. Then she laughed. "You should be grateful I even let you touch my vehicle," she said. The employees around us smirked. Some pulled out their phones, others looked away. I stood there in my oil-stained work clothes, a black single father trying to earn an honest living, while one of the richest women in the city treated me like I was nothing. What she didn't know was that I wasn't upset about the money anymore. I was upset because my 8-year-old son was sitting in my truck watching everything, watching his father being humiliated. So I quietly folded the invoice, took one last look at her, and said something that made her laugh even harder. I said, "That's okay. Your father and I will settle it tomorrow." The entire parking lot burst into laughter, because nobody there knew one thing. 24 hours later, that same CEO would walk into her father's office expecting another normal day, and instead, she would watch him hand me a check for $19 million. And when he revealed who I really was, the color drained from her face. She never laughed at me again. My name is Marcus Reed, and for most people who passed me on the street, I was just another black mechanic trying to make ends meet. They saw the grease stains on my hands, the worn boots on my feet, and the 20-year-old pickup truck I drove around town. They never saw the man behind those things. They never saw the father waking up before sunrise every morning to make breakfast for his son. They never saw the nights I spent worrying about bills, wondering how I would keep the lights on for another month. My entire world revolved around my 8-year-old son, Elijah. Ever since his mother passed away when he was only 3 years old, it had been just the two of us. Every decision I made, every hour I worked, every sacrifice I endured was for him. That morning started like every other. I was underneath a customer's pickup truck when my phone rang. I wiped my hands on a rag and answered. "Marcus Repairs." A sharp female voice responded immediately. "My assistant says you're the best mechanic available today." I glanced at the number. It wasn't familiar. "I'll do my best." "What's the problem?" "My SUV broke down outside our corporate headquarters. I need it fixed immediately." There wasn't even a greeting, no introduction, no respect, just demands. Still, work was work. "I can be there in 30 minutes. Make it 20. The line went dead. I sighed. Some customers believed money gave them permission to treat people however they wanted. Unfortunately, I couldn't afford to be picky. I grabbed my tools and headed toward the address her assistant had texted me. The moment I arrived, I understood exactly who I was dealing with. The headquarters belonged to one of the largest technology companies in the state. The glass building towered over everything around it. Luxury vehicles lined the parking lot. Employees wearing expensive suits hurried through the entrance. And standing beside a black luxury SUV was a woman who looked like she owned the entire city. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, designer clothes, diamond earrings, perfect makeup, the kind of confidence that comes from never hearing the word no. The moment she saw my truck, disappointment flashed across her face. Then she looked at me, and her expression became even worse. "You are the mechanic?" I nodded. "Marcus Reed." She looked me up and down. "You're all they could find?" I forced a smile. "Let's take a look at the vehicle." She crossed her arms. "Just fix it." "No thank you. No please. Nothing." I ignored her attitude and got to work. Within minutes, I identified the problem. A damaged fuel system component. Not a difficult repair, but it required careful work. As I repaired the vehicle, employees passed by, occasionally glancing at me. Most ignored me completely. A few looked at me the same way their CEO did, like I didn't belong, like I was invisible. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. I missed lunch. I missed an appointment with another customer. Most importantly, I missed Elijah's school science presentation. My chest tightened every time I thought about it. He had spent weeks preparing. The night before, he had practiced his speech 3 times in our living room. "Dad, you'll be there, right?" I had promised him. Now I wasn't. Because I needed the money. When you're raising a child alone, promises and bills often collide, and bills usually win. Finally, After nearly 6 hours of work, the SUV was running perfectly. I closed the hood and approached the CEO. "It's fixed." She barely looked up from her phone. "Good." I handed her the invoice. The total was $199, less than what some people spent on lunch. She glanced at it, then laughed. Actually laughed. "What is this?" "The invoice." "For this?" I nodded. Her expression hardened. "I'm not paying that." At first I thought she was joking. Then I realized she wasn't. "Excuse me?" She folded her arms. "I didn't authorize that amount. You authorized the repair. I don't care." I stared at her. The employees nearby were beginning to notice. A small crowd started forming. I felt my stomach knot. "Ma'am, your vehicle wasn't working." "I repaired it. The charge is $199. She smirked. "That's your problem." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You owe me for the work." "No." The word hit me like a brick. Just no. As if 6 hours of labor meant nothing. As if my time had no value. As if I had no value. I glanced toward my truck. Through the windshield, I saw Elijah sitting quietly in the passenger seat. School had ended hours ago. A neighbor had picked him up and brought him here. Now he was watching everything. Watching his father being humiliated. The realization hurt more than losing the money. The CEO noticed where I was looking. Then she saw Elijah. For a brief moment, I thought she might show some compassion. Instead, she rolled her eyes. "Honestly, this is why people never get ahead." Several employees laughed. My fists clenched. Not from anger, from heartbreak. Because my son heard that. My son heard someone tell his father he would never get ahead. I took a deep breath. One breath, then another. Years of struggle had taught me something important. Never let emotional people control your actions. Stay calm, stay patient, stay focused. So instead of arguing, I quietly folded the invoice and slipped it into my pocket. That seemed to confuse her. "You giving up already?" I looked directly into her eyes. "No." A smug smile spread across her face. "Then what?" I answered calmly. "Your father and I will settle it tomorrow." For a second, complete silence filled the parking lot. Then laughter exploded everywhere. Employees laughed, managers laughed, even the CEO doubled over laughing. "My father?" she shouted. The crowd laughed even harder. Nobody believed me. Why would they? To them, I was just a poor black mechanic, a single dad with grease on his clothes, a man standing next to a rusty pickup truck. What possible connection could I have to one of the most powerful businessmen in the country? The CEO wiped tears of laughter from her eyes. "This I've got to hear." I simply smiled. Because unlike everyone else in that parking lot, I wasn't joking. And exactly 24 hours later, her father was going to reveal a secret that would completely change her life. A secret he had hidden for nearly 20 years. And when the truth came out, $19 million would be the smallest shock waiting for her. That night, I drove home in silence. Elijah sat beside me, holding his little school project in his lap. It was a cardboard airplane with 2 bottle cap wheels and silver paper wings. He had drawn my name on the side with a blue marker. "Dad," he said quietly, "why didn't that lady pay you?" I kept my eyes on the road. For a few seconds, I didn't know what to say. Because how do you explain cruelty to an 8-year-old child? How do you tell your son that some people will look at your clothes, your skin, your job, your old truck, and decide your dignity is cheaper than a cup of coffee? So I said the only thing I could say. Because some people forget that respect doesn't come from money. Elijah looked down. "But you fixed her car." "I did. So she should pay you." I smiled a little. "That's right." He was silent again. Then he asked the question that broke me. "Do people treat you like that because we're poor?" My hands tightened around the steering wheel. "No, son," I said softly. "They treat people like that because they are poor inside." When we reached our small house, I made him dinner, checked his homework, and pretended everything was fine. But after he fell asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table with that unpaid invoice in front of me. $199. That number stared back at me like an insult. Not because it was big, because it was honest. I had earned it. I reached into an old metal box under the sink and pulled out a yellow envelope. Inside were documents I had not looked at in years. Letters, legal papers, old photographs, and one business card with the name Charles Whitmore written on it. That name could open doors, but I had promised myself I would never use it unless I had no other choice. Years ago, before I became the man people saw in oil-stained clothes, I had been something else. I had been a young engineer with a gift for machines. I could hear a bad engine and know what was wrong before opening the hood. I could design systems people twice my age didn't understand. And Charles Whitmore had noticed. He was not just a businessman. He was a legend, a billionaire investor, a man who had built industries from nothing. When I was 23, Charles took me under his wing. He called me brilliant. He called me the future. He even offered to fund my first company. But life does not always follow talent. My wife got sick. Medical bills swallowed everything. I walked away from boardrooms, patents, and investors because the woman I loved needed me more than the world did. Charles respected that. Before I disappeared from that life, he made me sign one document, a quiet agreement. If the technology I designed ever became profitable, my ownership would remain untouched. I never chased it. I never asked for updates. I became a father, then a widower, then a mechanic, but Charles never forgot me. I stared at his old card for a long time before picking up my phone. The number still worked. A receptionist answered first, then an assistant, then silence. Finally, an old voice came through. "Marcus?" My throat tightened. "Yes, sir." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Charles exhaled like he had been waiting years to hear my voice. "My boy," he said, "where have you been?" I closed my eyes, trying to survive. His voice softened. "And Elijah? He's growing fast. I've wanted to see you both. I know." There was a pause. Then he asked, "Why are you calling tonight?" I looked at the invoice. "Your daughter refused to pay me today." The silence on the other end changed. It became cold, dangerous. "Victoria?" "Yes." "What happened?" I told him everything. Not with anger, not with drama. Just the truth. The broken SUV, the 6 hours of work, the unpaid $199, the public humiliation, the employees laughing, my son watching from the truck. When I finished, Charles did not speak for almost 10 seconds. Then he said, "Come to my office tomorrow morning. Bring the boy if you can. I'm not trying to cause trouble." "You didn't cause it," he said. "You only revealed it." The next morning, I put on my cleanest shirt. It was still old, but it was pressed. Elijah wore his school uniform and kept asking where we were going. "To meet someone from my past," I told him. Charles Whitmore's private office was on the top floor of the same building where Victoria had humiliated me. When we entered, the receptionist looked confused. Then Charles himself stepped out of the elevator. He was older now, silver-haired, slower in his steps, but his eyes were still sharp. The moment he saw me, he crossed the room and hugged me like family. Everyone in the lobby froze. Elijah looked shocked. "Dad," he whispered, "you know him." Charles knelt in front of my son. "I knew your father before the world forgot how important he was." My eyes burned. Before I could respond, the elevator doors opened again. Victoria stepped out, wearing another expensive suit, holding coffee, looking annoyed. Then she saw me, her mouth twisted. "You?" Charles stood slowly. "Victoria," he said, his voice like thunder, "come upstairs." For the first time, she looked unsure. "Dad, what is this?" He didn't answer. We rode up in silence. Inside his office, Charles walked to his desk, opened a leather folder, and pulled out several documents. Victoria crossed her arms. "If this is about yesterday, he's exaggerating." Charles slammed his hand on the desk. Elijah flinched. I gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Charles pointed at his daughter. "You humiliated a man who helped build the foundation of this company." Victoria laughed nervously. "What are you talking about?" Charles turned the documents toward her. "Before your name was ever on this building, Marcus Reed designed the system that made our logistics division worth billions." Her face changed, just slightly. Charles continued. "And because of the agreement I signed with him 20 years ago, this company still owes him what he never came to claim." He picked up a check from the folder and placed it on the desk. Victoria stared at the number. Her coffee slipped from her hand. The cup hit the floor. $19 million. Charles looked at me. "This is not charity, Marcus. This is what was always yours." I couldn't speak. Elijah looked from the check to me, his eyes wide. Victoria's lips trembled. But yesterday, he was just. Charles cut her off. Just what? The room went silent, and for the first time since I met her, Victoria had no answer. Victoria stood frozen in her father's office, staring at the check like it was a weapon pointed straight at her pride. $19 million. Yesterday, she had laughed over $199. Now her own father had placed more money than she could imagine into the hands of the same man she treated like dirt. I could hear Elijah breathing beside me. His little fingers were wrapped around my hand, but his eyes were fixed on the check. "Dad," he whispered, "is that real?" I looked down at him and gave a small nod. "It's real, son." Victoria's face turned pale. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The woman who had humiliated me in front of half the company now looked like she was standing on glass. Charles Whitmore leaned back in his chair, his old eyes sharp with disappointment. "Do you know what hurts me most?" he asked her. Victoria swallowed. "Dad, I didn't know who he was." Charles stood slowly. "That is exactly the problem." The room became silent. He walked around the desk and pointed toward me. "You think respect should depend on who a person is connected to. You think dignity comes after you discover someone has money, patents, or power?" Victoria looked down. Charles' voice grew heavier. "You saw a black man in work clothes. You saw grease on his hands. You saw an old truck, and you decided he was beneath you." I felt Elijah's grip tighten. Those words were not easy to hear, even when they were true. Victoria shook her head quickly. "No, that's not what happened." Charles' eyes narrowed. "Then tell me what happened." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing, because the truth was ugly, and ugly truth has a way of stealing excuses. Charles picked up the unpaid invoice from the folder. Somehow, he had printed a copy overnight. $199, he said, holding it up. That was all he asked for. Not a favor, not special treatment. Payment for honest labor. Victoria's eyes filled with panic. "I was having a stressful day." Charles laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "A stressful day does not create cruelty. It only exposes it." Those words landed hard. Even I felt them. Then Charles turned toward me. "Marcus, I owe you an apology." I shook my head. "No, sir, you don't." "Yes, I do," he said firmly. "Because I built this company, but I allowed people inside it to forget what it was built on." He looked at Victoria again. "This company was built by people like him. People who worked when nobody clapped. People who solved problems quietly. People whose names never made headlines." Victoria's shoulders dropped. For the first time, she looked less like a CEO and more like a child being forced to face herself. Charles then pressed a button on his desk phone. "Send the executive board in." Victoria's head snapped up. "Dad, please." But it was too late. Within minutes, 6 board members entered the office. They all wore expensive suits and careful expressions. Behind them came the head of human resources, the legal director, and 2 senior managers. Some of them recognized me from the parking lot. Their faces changed immediately. One of them had laughed yesterday. Now he would not even look me in the eye. Charles stood at the head of the room. "Yesterday," he said, "my daughter refused to pay this man for completed repair work. She humiliated him publicly. Several employees witnessed it. Some participated by laughing. No one spoke." Charles placed the invoice on the table. "This behavior is unacceptable." Victoria's voice cracked. "Dad, can we discuss this privately?" "No," he said. "You made it public, so accountability will also be public." The room went cold. I glanced at Elijah. His eyes were wide, but not scared anymore. He was watching something different now. He was watching justice. Charles turned to the legal director. "Prepare a formal apology letter. Prepare immediate payment of the invoice with damages for public humiliation. F." Then he looked at the board. "As of today, Victoria Whitmore is suspended from executive duties pending review." Victoria gasped. "What?" The board members shifted uncomfortably. Charles did not blink. "You are not fit to lead people you do not respect." Her eyes filled with tears now. "Dad, I worked for this position." Charles nodded. "Fun and comfortably. Victor Tomzel, Kingananand. Victor Tomzel, Kinganan Kiniginidram. Victor Tomzel Domzel. Victor Komzel Tond." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered Elijah sitting in my truck, watching grown adults laugh at his father. Some wounds need more than sorry. Charles turned back to me. Marcus, I would like you to return to the company. I froze. Victoria looked at him in shock. The board members exchanged glances. Charles continued, not as a mechanic, as a senior engineering consultant. You still own part of the technology that built this company. And frankly, we need minds like yours again. My heart pounded. For years, I had buried that part of myself. The engineer, the inventor, the man with ideas bigger than survival. I looked at Elijah. He stared up at me with hope in his eyes. Dad, he whispered, you used to build things. I smiled sadly. Yeah, buddy, a long time ago. Charles stepped closer. It does not have to be a long time ago anymore. The room blurred for a second. I thought of my wife. I thought of hospital bills. I thought of all the nights I had chosen survival over dreams. I thought of the way people looked at me when I wore work clothes, never knowing the mind underneath them. Then I looked at Victoria. She was crying now, quietly. I'm sorry, she whispered. I studied her face. This time there was no arrogance, no smirk, no performance, just shame. But apology is not a magic eraser, so I said calmly, I hear you. She looked up, waiting for more. I didn't give it, because forgiveness, if it came, would come later. Not because she was crying, not because her father was watching, not because money had changed hands. Charles nodded like he understood. Then he placed the check in my hand. The paper felt heavier than any tool I had ever carried. $19 million. But the strangest part was, in that moment, I was not thinking about buying a mansion or a new truck. I was thinking about Elijah never having to wonder if his father was small. I was thinking about my son seeing me stand tall in a room full of people who once laughed. As we walked out of the office, the same employees from yesterday lined the hallway. No one laughed now. Some looked ashamed. Some looked afraid. Some whispered. Elijah lifted his chin higher with every step. At the elevator, he looked up at me and smiled. Dad? Yeah? You didn't yell at her. No. Why? I looked back at the glass office doors. Because sometimes, son, quiet truth is louder than anger. The elevator opened, and as we stepped inside, I saw Victoria watching us from the office. For the first time, she looked like she finally understood. But what none of us knew was that the biggest twist had not happened yet, because Charles Whitmore had not called me there only to give me a check. He had another document in that folder, one that would decide the future of his entire company, and somehow he wanted my signature on it.